They cast him in chains before the people, a once favored lord dragged through the marketplace as children spat and neighbors turned their faces away. He stood silent under the sun, while banners that once welcomed him snapped in the wind, and every tethered rumor of treason and betrayal stitched itself into a crown of public scorn. But history remembers that humiliation and power are twin tools. Broken men learn the geometry of revenge, and empires underestimate the patient. Listen close. This is the story of how a man who tasted dust and disgrace taught kings to tremble. If you want the whole, unflinching truth, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a confession that history tried to bury. The square of Altenburg had seen executions, coronations, and sermons thick with fear, but never a humiliation so carefully staged. Iron rings bit into Ulrich von Eberfeld's wrists as guards forced him forward. The chain dragged deliberately slow, so every clink echoed between the stone houses. He had once crossed this square on horseback, cloaked in crimson wool, stopping to bless children and settle disputes. Now the same children stared wide-eyed, taught too early how swiftly favor curdled into disgrace. The charges were read aloud by a clerk whose voice trembled despite himself. Abuse of royal authority, secret correspondence with rival princes, and, most damning of all, intent to manipulate succession. None of it was proven. None of it needed to be. In the 13th century empire, accusation was often sharper than evidence, and rumor served power better than truth. Ulrich did not protest. He had learned, even before the chains, that denial only fed the spectacle. He searched the crowd for familiar faces. Some were absent by choice, others by fear. His younger brother, Conrad, stood near the gallows platform, his eyes fixed not on Ulrich, but on the royal envoy beside him. Conrad's loyalty had always been careful, measured. In that moment, Ulrich understood with painful clarity that his brother had already chosen survival over blood. The fall had begun months earlier in the imperial court at Mainz, where Ulrich's counsel had carried weight beyond his rank. He was not a king, but kings listened to him. He understood borders, marriage contracts, the slow mathematics of alliances. That was his crime. When the aging emperor grew ill, factions sharpened their knives, and Ulrich's voice, urging caution, delay, legitimacy, became an obstacle. The young prince, favored by the southern lords, needed a clean path, not a patient strategist who questioned haste. So letters were forged, messengers were bribed. A whispered claim spread that Ulrich had been negotiating with Bohemian envoys, offering support for an alternative claimant. The emperor, half-conscious and surrounded by men eager to inherit his shadow, allowed the arrest. It was quieter that way. A problem removed without blood. Ulrich was confined to a tower cell overlooking the river Saale. The room stank of damp straw and rusted iron. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the bell of the abbey downstream. No trial date was set. That too was intentional. Uncertainty was meant to hollow him out, to reduce him from statesman to cautionary tale. Yet the cell gave him something court life never had: time. He replayed every conversation of the past year, every hesitation, every compromise. He saw now how power shifted not with righteousness, but with fear. The men who had destroyed him were not braver or wiser. They were simply less burdened by conscience. News reached him through a sympathetic jailer, a veteran soldier whose pay had once been secured by Ulrich's signature. The prince had been declared protector of the realm. Several border lords were already rebelling. Taxes had doubled. Grain convoys were seized for the army. The realm was straining, and strain always revealed fractures. From his cell, Ulrich began to write, not letters of protest, but careful reflections on law, precedent, and the dangers of disputed succession. He committed them to memory, knowing parchment could be confiscated, but a trained mind could not. When monks visited to hear confession, he spoke not of innocence, but of order, of what happened when ambition outran legitimacy. The monks listened. Monks always listened. After nearly a year, Ulrich was released without ceremony. No apology, no restoration. He was simply escorted beyond the city gate and told to leave imperial lands. Exile was supposed to finish him. A man without title, without estate, without allies. He traveled east under assumed names, sleeping in barns, monasteries, and the homes of minor knights who still remembered his fairness. Word spread quietly that Ulrich von Eberfeld was not dead, only waiting. Discontented lords began to seek him out, not for rebellion, but for advice. He gave it sparingly, never committing himself, always letting others believe the ideas were their own. 2 years later, when the emperor finally died, the realm erupted exactly as Ulrich had predicted. Rival kings were proclaimed within weeks of each other. Armies mobilized, treaties collapsed overnight, and in the confusion, letters began circulating. Old letters, once dismissed as forgeries, now supported by testimony from abbots, jurists, and men who had nothing left to lose. At a council convened in Regensburg, a name was spoken again, cautiously at first, then with urgency. Ulrich von Eberfeld, the man they had chained, the man who understood how this could end. As the delegates argued, a sealed message arrived from the northern princes. It bore Ulrich's mark, not a plea for restoration, but a warning. If they crowned the wrong king, he would ensure the realm never knew peace again. For the first time since his disgrace, the chamber fell silent. The warning Ulrich sent was not a threat of armies or blades. It was sharper than that. It was a promise of consequence. The northern princes understood immediately, because they were men who had watched treaties collapse and knew that legitimacy, once fractured, poisoned everything it touched. Ulrich had not returned, demanding his titles. He had returned, holding a mirror. The council at Regensburg fractured into factions within days. Messengers rode through winter rain to summon Ulrich, not as a prisoner, but as an advisor in the interest of peace. When he entered the city, there were no chains this time. Still, he walked on foot, his cloak plain, his bearing measured. He had learned that humility unsettled the powerful far more than arrogance. Inside the council hall, he spoke only after being pressed. His voice was quieter than the arguments that preceded it, which forced the room to lean toward him. He did not accuse the young king or exalt the rival claimant. Instead, he recited precedents, marriages unrecognized, oaths violated, territories lost to endless civil war because ambition had outrun law. He named names, dates, and outcomes. He reminded them, that the empire had bled before and that it could bleed again. Some called him manipulative, others called him indispensable. Both were correct. Behind closed doors, Ulrich worked tirelessly, drafting compromise frameworks that allowed men to retreat without humiliation. A dual kingship for a fixed term, arbitration by ecclesiastical jurists, guarantees that borders would remain untouched. He offered solutions that preserved pride while quietly restoring stability. The irony was not lost on him. The man once accused of threatening succession was now the only one capable of saving it. Yet power always demands a price. One evening, Conrad, his brother, requested a private meeting. Time had aged him poorly. His eyes carried the strain of a man who had survived by silence. He confessed what Ulrich already knew. It was his testimony, carefully phrased and selectively remembered, that had sealed Ulrich's arrest years earlier, not because Conrad hated him, but because he had been promised Ulrich's estates in exchange for loyalty to the rising faction. "I thought you would be executed," Conrad said, his voice breaking. "I told myself it was mercy." Ulrich listened without interruption. When Conrad finished, he did not raise his voice. He simply asked, "And when the empire burns, who will remember your mercy?" Conrad left the city before dawn. Weeks later, his holdings were quietly confiscated under new legal interpretations Ulrich himself had helped draft. There was no revenge proclamation, only consequence. By spring, a settlement was reached. One king would rule, the other would withdraw with honors and lands beyond the eastern marches. The war was averted not by victory, but by exhaustion. Ulrich declined formal restoration of his titles, accepting instead a newly created position, custodian of imperial law. It was an office without banners or armies, but with authority to interpret legitimacy itself. From that seat, Ulrich became untouchable. Kings consulted him before marriages. Princes sought his judgment before raising levies. Even the church deferred when succession disputes arose. He never forgot the chains, and he never allowed those who wielded power to forget them either. He insisted on records, witnesses, and legal clarity, building a system that made sudden purges far more difficult. But history is never kind to men who stand between ambition and its rewards. Years later, as Ulrich's hair silvered, a chronicler noted something curious. Rebellions still occurred, but they failed more often. Successions still sparked tension, but fewer realms collapsed into war. Stability, it seemed, had become habit, and habits outlived men. When Ulrich finally died, there was no grand tomb. He had requested burial in a monastery overlooking the Saale, near the tower where he had once been imprisoned. At his funeral, no king spoke, none dared. Instead, abbots, jurists, and minor lords carried the bier. Men who understood that power could be restrained, if only briefly, by memory and law. Only after his death did a sealed letter surface, written in his hand and addressed to no one in particular. It was copied and circulated quietly among courts. It read, "They believed chains would make me small. They did not understand that humiliation teaches patience, and patience, in time, teaches kings fear." The twist was not that Ulrich rose again, but that he never truly left. The system he built outlived the men who destroyed him, and the empire learned too late that the most dangerous figure in history is not the conqueror, but the survivor who remembers. Power gained through betrayal is fragile. Power shaped by endurance, restraint, and memory reshapes history itself. If you value stories where truth survives humiliation and history speaks without mercy, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Some lessons are too costly to forget.